Hi all, thanks for joining the session. We'll kickstart the session now. And thanks to all those who joined early too. And thanks for being. Good evening and welcome to the yet another PMI session hosted by PMI Island Chapter. My name is Santosh Joshi and I'll be your host today. This webinar will be recorded for any future references. Today we have an eminent speaker who will be talking about the agile for non-agile adoption. Yeah. One second. I think there is some echo coming. Okay. Yeah.
Much
So
better.
we have John with us. John is currently coaching lean agile adoption and in a 6,000 employee division of a tier 1 global bank. Previously, John was also responsible for the agile transformation in a large multinational company. Impressive result from that agile transformation is the benefit of around 50% savings in a schedule and around 40% savings on the effort. And that is an amazing result to achieve. John also is an instructor for the Disciplined Agile Value Stream consultant, Disciplined Agile Senior Scrum Master, Disciplined Agile Scrum Master certification trainings. John has worked in a change management for over 30 years, comes with a lot of experience. He also wrote leadership articles, including 2 books that he has authored, and he also created the Agile Lineout framework. We are so glad to have you, John, here today. I request you to take forward the session for us.
Thank you very much, Santosh. Thank you. I'll share, yes?
Yeah, you can go ahead and share the screen.
Okay, good. Hello. So I thought tonight we might talk about Agile for non-tech teams. Quite often what happens is I am coaching software teams and managers or senior people come to me and they say, John, we work in HR or we work in marketing and we'd like to become more agile. We'd like to get more involved. How do we do that? And so on. So I started to think about, well, what about is there anything that's unique about Agile besides the name of the software engineering Agile Manifesto or the Agile Manifesto for software engineering? And I realized that actually there's not, right? The fact is that most of what we do with Agile is actually in software engineering is that we add in software engineering practices and those become the bedrock of what the team does. So I started to look at this and look at how can we start to use Agile techniques on a wider scale. So what I've got for you tonight is the following. I've got an indication of how we did the planning of a transformation in British Telecom using Agile. I've got the plans, the OKRs, the materials, so you can actually see how we ran a transformation using Agile. Of course, Agile is not, everybody thinks of Agile as got to be 2-week working cycles or 3-week sprints. That doesn't work when you're working with business change activities and cultural change. You need a much longer horizon. So we started to really go back to the bedrock of what Agile is and so on. So we're going to start with there, and I'll talk you through what Agile is and how it works and so on. Agile is a constantly evolving way of working. And what do I mean by that? Well, when a team decides how it's going to work, if you think about the content of continuous improvement, what they do is they look at what they're doing and far they're going, how fast they're going, and they start to improve that. So over the life of a 6-month, 12-month project, the team should be changing the way it works in order to increase its effectiveness and its efficiency. The Agile in itself uses the construct of teams. Now, Scrum talks about a team between 10 and 4 and 10 people. When you're doing sort of transformation work, you actually need a bigger, slightly bigger team than that. And so my question was, how do we run Agile projects with a slightly bigger team? Most of what Agile calls and talks about with team size comes from a guy, Robin Dunbar. And Dunbar says you can run with a team of 15 people rather than these numbers that are used by Scrum and SAFe and so on. So I looked at how we can mobilize a team of a slightly larger number in order to run a transformation. Compared to Waterfall, what Agile does is it uses the collective intelligence of the individuals. So rather than one person preparing a plan, the Agile principle is that multiple people prepare the plan and the team prepares the plan and estimates its work and so on. So what we're doing when we start to think about Agile in a business context is we start to use that collective intelligence and start to help them produce a plan, but the plan may be slightly different to what a software engineering team does, and in many ways is less predictable. The other thing which Agile does is it transfers responsibilities, and I know I'm talking to the PMI here, but it transfers some responsibilities from people like project managers and resource managers into the team. And what we need to think about is, okay, how do we maintain that empowering of the individuals and the self-managed team element when we start to do business change and projects of that nature, right? Let me just go up one. So when we're talking about the barriers that when we're starting to introduce Agile, the barriers tend to be inconsistency in the processes. People like PMOs love to have a consistent process, and if the team is constantly evolving its process, PMOs get very unhappy about this in some circumstances. The other thing to remember is that there is cultural clash, because organizations typically have promoted senior leaders through planning and controlling work and making things happen. And now what we're asking those senior leaders to do is to change the way they work such that they facilitate the teams and allow the teams to start to plan and control their work. Okay, senior management still monitors that, but some of the management activities, particularly in middle management, move to the team. So there's generally, you can find organizational resistance to the changes that Agile needs and so on. People who have grown up in being a world where they're told what to do and then all of a sudden being asked, what would you like to do, suddenly find that's quite difficult, and particularly colleagues in certain parts of the world, particularly in the East, find this very uncomfortable to suddenly start to take responsibility and work in a different way. And so therefore what we have to do as coaches, we have to start to plan and control and give them plan and train such that they can actually start to take control of their own work. The leadership element, it happens in not just the team but also around the outside of the team. So we need to make sure that these teams actually take over some of that leadership responsibility. And last but not least, we need to think about management support and sponsorship. So when we're looking at Agile transformation, these are the scope items, or these are the influences that we need to think about when we're starting to use Agile as a transformation. When we were planning, we were looking at these issues and thinking about how could we resolve those. Okay, so our transformation principles that we were using were as follows. We wanted the transformation to come from within. In other words, the division I was working with in British Telecom, we wanted those people to transform. We didn't want us to inflict transformation on them. Okay, we wanted to act as catalysts. And in acting as a catalyst, we needed to make sure that we had a vision that we could articulate, and we could be very clear about what the outcome is that we were desiring, and being very clear about potentially what the steps were on the journey. And also, as catalysts, what we need to do is to stimulate and make change happen without actually changing ourselves. But that means that we need to use our expertise to stimulate change. Senior leaders always expect to have a plan, right? And if they're investing a lot of money, effort, time into transformation, they need a plan. But we also know that in cultural change, a plan that won't necessarily be adhered to. So we need to think about the fact that the change when we're changing people, we need to think about the fact that things may alter. Things that we change today may change back in 2 weeks' time. It's not like software where you can say we've done that definitely. And what we have to do is to make sure that we keep the change moving and the momentum building and so on. Lastly, one of the transformation principles that we used was that we want to communicate 10 times more than we think we need, because we need to make sure that the teams and the organization that we're changing understands what's happening and where we are and so on. So those are our transformation principles. Now let's start to think about, okay, how did we do this? We started to think about, we used John Kotter, and I like John Kotter very much. And John Kotter is a professor at I think it's Harvard or Yale or Stanford or one of those American universities, and he's been around since the late 80s. And he wrote a book called Leading Change. And those 8-step leading change principles that John Kotter identified 40 years ago are still very much applicable to our way in which we run transformations today in an agile form. On those transformation principles, he talks about creating a sense of urgency, building a guiding coalition, forming a strategic visioning plan, enlisting a volunteer army, enabling actions, removing barriers, generating short wins and celebrating them, sustain and accelerate, and institutionalize the change. Those were his 8 principles. But in terms of what we try to achieve, what we were looking at is a different way of looking at the activities. We concentrated on building a guiding coalition. And this is a guiding coalition which we're looking at is people from different parts of the organization to work together. We wanted to create a strategic plan and vision that people could assemble behind. And we did this through quarterly planning events and getting people to understand what we're trying to achieve this quarter. Last thing we did was fairly radical in many cases. We enlisted a volunteer army. Now, I didn't realize the impacts of having volunteers. We had these agile champions around the business, but what that meant was we suddenly mean from our team of 10, 12 people in the guiding coalition, all of a sudden we had 100 odd people. And that meant that we needed to make sure they had work to do. We need to make sure that we'd prepared the ground for them to be effective. We needed to listen to their feedback. There was a whole host of things that we needed to do. So from a sudden situation with an agile team of planning 12, 15 people as an agile coalition, we suddenly had over 100 odd people that we needed to plan and mobilize and control and get feedback from and so on. That guiding coalition is interesting. The guiding coalition is about creating, it's like a steering group, but it doesn't steer. And it's not like, sorry, it's not like a steering group, although it steers. In other words, it is actually doing the work rather than, if you like, sitting and governing the work. Those people, it's an agile team made up of individuals at various levels in the organization from various different parts. And this was something we really focused on, because we used the individual's network in the organization in order to mobilize and change those parts of the organization. So each one of those managers on the guiding coalition has got a group of peers, colleagues, friends, and whatever. And those were the networks that we used in order to start to transform. Typically, members of the coalition take responsibility of specific elements, and like a Scrum team, the coalition is jointly and collectively responsible. And we had to train those people to say, you know, you are responsible and so on, even though they sort of focused in on marketing or communications of the idea, or they focused in on building a new network or the whatever. We needed to make sure that these guys realized that they had their piece, but they were jointly and collectively responsible. So we produced every quarter. I was in BT for 4 quarters, no, 6 quarters. And each quarter we had some themes. So on the left, this is a plan on a page or an agile sundial, right? So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got increase the pace of change. So that was one of our themes for this particular quarter that we're talking about. Then we talked about improve quality and speed. We were talking about improve the quality and speed, not of the network, but the speed of the change and the speed of how people were delivering their components into the telecoms network. We established an agile framework, and we needed to make sure that teams understood what was in the framework. And to do that, we produced guidelines and so on. And then we needed to extend the roles of working. So that's about identifying the initial starting point for teams and then gradually improving those teams over time. You notice instead of producing a 2-week sprint plan, what we've got here is a 30, 60, 90-day plan. That 30, 60, 90-day plan is based on some horizons, okay? And we said, you know, in the first 30 days, what we're looking to do is to expand the activities in the teams. Bearing in mind, we were talking 4,800 people here. There were a lot of teams to talk with and talk to, and some of those teams were in the UK, some of those teams were in India. Then we needed to consolidate the changes we've made. We used a sort of expedition and base camp approach to try a new thing in a new area, make the changes, consolidate those changes, build the base camp, if you like, and then think about what we're going to do next. So you can see on the right hand side of this, we've got our 30, 60, 90 days outlined what our goals were. We use this plan on the page to talk to senior leaders as well, but it also reminded us of where we set out to achieve. And of course, after 30 days, we'll replan this and do the 31 to 60 days becomes the 0 to 30 days and so on. So it becomes a rolling plan. Behind each one of these plans and one of these goal areas, what we've got is a set of OKRs. Now, you may not have come across OKRs. OKRs stand for outcomes and key results. And you can see here for the increase the pace of change theme, our effort for the outcome was continued efforts in the existing BUs and select degree new BUs to join the transformation. And the key result, the as measured by, if you like, is the fact that we were looking for a further 3 BUs. Didn't matter which ones, but we were looking for 3 further BUs. And this is where the people's contact in the organization, we were able to work on those, because some of the guys were able to say, I think my team is ready, or I think this team is ready because I've talked to Joe or whatever. When you're looking at the improving the quality of speed, we were looking for exemplars. We wanted to get teams that could actually produce some results. You know, it's like getting that winning streak in a soccer team or a hockey team or whatever. So we wanted to make sure that people understood that they were winning. And so one of the two key measures we were looking for was cycle time and was defects. So in those two measures, they were, when we use this for real, those were absolute numbers, but I've obviously not put absolute numbers in this presentation because it's to a public. The third one is establish the framework. We needed to communicate and publish the guardrails at this particular month, because what we found is we produced some guide rails and then the organization started to use them, found difficulties with them, found gaps in them, and we provided those agile guide rails for the teams, and then we would start to communicate that there were new guide rails from the 1st and to publish them on the 15th. Extend the ways of working. What we were looking to do was to increase quarterly planning to all teams in the pilot. We got the teams together. The quarterly planning event we ran was that they explained what they were setting out to do last quarter, and they then explained how far they got against those particular goals. Excuse me. And then that was something that they did in public. So it was a bit like Hyde Park Corner. It was virtual, but basically what you could do is you could go into a breakout room and you could listen to what the team set out to achieve and what they'd actually achieved. And then at the end of the session, that review session, we brought everybody together to summarize where they got to and how they'd been working. And then they went off and for the next 2 or 3 hours actually planned the work that they were going to do for the next quarter. All the way through, we were measuring outcomes, checking the value delivered, and monitoring the transformational improvements. We had some fun. For example, we set up an agile equivalent of the Ice Bucket Challenge. So basically, we challenged middle managers and senior managers to identify impediments to their progress in transformation and resolve them. And if they did that and they published the results, then they had the freedom to challenge somebody else in another part of the organization to do something similar. That means some old accounts were settled, but it also meant that we were getting some inertia outside of the transformation team in terms of other people starting to think about what they needed to do to become more agile. So this was a great way of actually communicating with people, was a great way of setting the goals. So this is, if you like, our scope, statement of scope for the quarter. And then what we did was we used the Kanban board to coordinate the volunteers. Now, when you get 100 odd people doing various things around the organization, you need to keep track of who's doing what where. And we found a Kanban board was a way of doing that. We didn't necessarily define a definition of done. We also didn't set WIP limits or work in progress limits. We actually just use this Kanban board to visualize what people were doing in the organization so far as change is concerned. Some senior managers wanted to look at this, and I found that was great. So they looked at this and they could see what was going on in Network of the Future or legacy activities or whatever it was in the part of BT that we were working. But it gives a tremendous sense of achievement. And then one of the things we did at the end of the quarter was that we also did what we called an Agile Fest. And the Agile Fest was if you like, a celebration from the teams as to what they had been doing, and for them to explain to other parts of the organization what they'd achieved, what they'd found, what they'd learned, and so on. The Agile Fest was run over a day. It was a virtual, if you like, business conference. We had something like 20 or 15 or 20 presentations. In total, about 1,500 people attended the event out of a population of 4,800. And we had a maximum in one session was about 400 or so. So it's tremendous. Again, what we were able to do is to illustrate to the business that we're making progress and so on. Any questions? So stop me and ask one if you like. You'd have to come off mute. How important do I think emotional intelligence is? Absolutely essential, right? The emotional intelligence, for those of you that don't understand it, emotional intelligence is about how we react with others, whether it's in a social situation or whether it's in a business context or whether it's on a one-to-one. Being aware of yourself and how you react to situations, particularly when things get challenging, is incredibly important. Great question. Was that Karen that asked that? Great question. Anybody else questions? No? Okay. Let me just press on then and we can talk a bit more. Was that somebody just put another one in? So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think we are good. Let us continue.
Okay, so we generated these short-term wins. You know, we all talk about maintaining focus through low-hanging fruit and so on. Transformation is a drunken walk. Okay, I like to give that quote because my current transformation director uses it and I love it. I think it's exactly right. So you stagger in one direction and then you realize that you've got to go back and stagger in another direction and so on. And it's not a straight path, and it's not like software engineering. It's not like constructing a building. It's definitely, because you're changing people and culture, it's definitely something that you have to go back and refix, something you thought you'd fixed, all of those sort of things. So previous accomplishments need to be revisited or consolidation. But in order to maintain the momentum, we need to communicate all the time where we are, what we're doing, and so on. Obviously, you wouldn't communicate anything that was of a personal nature or teams were struggling. You look for early wins. But the other things that you need to think about is how do you progress, and so on. And have you made the progression you wanted? Now, I wanted to start to talk to you. So what I've just described to you is the outcome. Okay, we've got a successful transformation in a group of 4,800 people. We've mobilized a team which we called the Guiding Coalition. We've mobilized volunteers. We've got plans. We've got a vision together that people assemble behind. So if you break down what we've done, there are three components to this. The first is the outcome or the solution. And that solution needs to be broken down so it can be delivered incrementally. And we want feedback from those stakeholders. So we used the Agile champions in the volunteers to give us feedback. We used communities of practice with management teams to give us feedback. And in the absence of meaningful feedback from people, we tried to measure things like, for example, a progression of recruitment or attrition or whatever the particular item was. So this gave us data. And when you think about any development activity, there is always a piece that fits around the solution, understanding what you're trying to achieve, breaking it down, making sure you're on the right path, and so on. The next thing you've got to think about is there's a second part to this, and the part is the tools. What tools, techniques are we going to use? You know, that Kanban board is an example of one of the tools we use, but the Agile sundial is another. If we were doing some software engineering, there would be some software engineering that we were doing. If there were, surveys, we might be using Mentimeter or SurveyMonkey. We need to actually decide what are the tools and techniques that the Guiding Coalition is going to use. They need to be proficient in those tools and techniques and so on. And then lastly, what we've got to think about as well is how we work as a team. And the teams are more effective if they work together and collaborate rather than working as individuals. So we need to define roles and responsibilities. We need to have accountabilities. We need to build trust in each other and so on. Now, when we're starting, and Santosh mentioned that I was a disciplined agile value stream consultant. When we started to look at value streams and so on, we realized that a project is in fact a delivery system. And that delivery system is always made up of three components. The component is the solution, the tools and techniques, and the people. Now, those are the elements that are in, whether you're producing software, whether you're doing a new marketing plan, whether you're doing a business transformation, a culture change, a post-acquisition merger, those three things are there. And the systems theory says that those three pieces of work, those pieces of the project interact together and they are interdependent. They're not separate pieces. If you change something, for example, about the scope, you might need an additional expertise in the team. If you lose somebody in the team, you might need an additional tool. So these pieces of the system interrelate. So when I started to look at how we built these teams together, what I realized is we needed to look at the framework that we were trying to use and actually address each one of those three issues. So I called it Agile Lineout. Why did I do that? Because, well, first of all, obviously, Agile has got Scrum, and a lineout is an alternative way of restarting the game compared to a Scrum. So I thought quite comfortably about that. But also I realized that when we're starting to talk about those three components, we actually have a line which I'll call the solution line. The solution line is made up of what is it we're trying to achieve, and it's made up of breaking down that backlog so that we can, breaking down that solution into a backlog that we can then start to deliver. It's about creating an increment map of deliveries, and it's about getting feedback from the things that we've done and the changes that we've made, so that we can revise the work that's going on. So that's the first one, the solution line. The second line is the development line, or the tools. So in this, what we've got is mobilization and planning. Obviously, when we're talking about getting the team working together, understanding what they're doing the quarterly planning and the OKRs. The OKRs, it's interesting. Again, this gives you an illustration of how the bits fit together. Are the OKRs part of backlog preparation, or are the OKRs part of mobilization and planning? And the answer is they're part of both. And this is obviously where the solutions and the development lines start to work together. In Scrum, what we do is we do a daily stand-up or daily inspection event. When we started to look at this from a transformation perspective, we didn't need a daily event, but we needed to evaluate on a regular basis. We chose twice a week. We need to evaluate how well we were doing, and in particular, when we've got all those volunteers out in the business, how well they are doing. So we needed to inspect for performance. I did some research in some work from a lady called Connie Gersick, and Connie Gersick found that the time that human teams are in a position where they would like to reevaluate how they are working is actually not at the end of the task as in Scrum, but it's actually in the middle of the task. And she did a PhD, and she reviewed about 12 or 14 teams, and every team stopped their task in the middle, roughly the middle, and did check that what they were doing and change their way of working. So it looks to me that teams are more willing to learn in the middle of a task or an iteration than they are at the end, and it could explain why in Scrum teams sometimes we struggle with getting teams to do retrospection. After the team has done some enhancement, then always what they're doing is they're looking at the end goal. How are we going to get there? Yes or no? So they're always inspecting and checking for completion. And that tends to be the development process, if you like, irrespective of which tools you're using. Those 4 stages seem to be the ones that come in to play. And obviously what you've got in the middle of this line out is the team behavior. Now, the team behavior is around building the team. Now, in Agile Lineout, what I've done is I've actually gone back to a model by people called Dickinson and McIntyre, and that actually has broken down team performance and team building into 8 different elements. And that gives us as coaches the ability to start to think about team building. And team building is more than just going down the pizza shop and having pizza together. You know, it's really about trying to get ways of working established and getting people roles and responsibilities and so on. So when we're starting to look at that team behavior line, we could look at, is the team working as a team, or is it just a group of people? We can start to look at how they're working. In other words, are they sharing responsibility? Are they backing each other up? Are they, you know, if somebody's finished some work, does somebody else step in and help somebody who's struggling? All of those sort of things are part of this team behavior line, but a team doesn't sit in isolation. It's typically part of a wider organization. So therefore, when you're starting to evaluate how a team is working, you need to look at how they're relating to the external relationships. Now, when we're doing transformation, what you find is that people sit on the periphery of the team, and some people think they should be part of the team and not, and some people you've admitted and they really should be part of the team. So you're constantly monitoring the boundary of the team to make sure that you've got the right players around the table, so that you can actually move the transformation forward. The last element, and this is around Peter Senge's 5th dimension, and it's also around other behavioral science, that teams that learn together stay together and actually become a team a lot easier, right? And so one of the things we put in Lineout was, and we did it in British Telecom, was what are the things we've learned? And we put those on actually it was a Miro board. And we also did what are the things we need to learn. So I had people say, oh, I'm doing, there was a lady, a Romanian lady who was being responsible for redesigning the network of the future. And she said, how are we going to do this? How are we going to build the team? And so we understood, we decided that the way to do it was through value stream mapping. And so, for example, she said that she'd like to learn about value stream mapping. And then once I'd actually taught that lady how to do the value stream mapping, then other people wanted to use the same technique in other parts of the business. So that started to get us a learning within our 15 people within our guiding coalition, but it also gave us items that we wanted to put into the transformation plan in terms of building the capabilities of the organization. Now, when you start to look at lineouts, so you've got, if you like, the solution line is the defending team, the development line is the attacking team, the team behavior line is throwing the ball down the middle and everybody's jumping. But what you'll find in rugby is that, and I suspect most of you know this, that the position and the strategies of the players change according to their position on the field. So what we're looking at is, okay, let's look at how we've got a 30, 60, 90-day plan. On the end of the 30 days, let's take stock. Let's evaluate where we are. Let's decide whether we need to change anything. Maybe the solution line, we've got some feedback that some of the work that we thought we'd achieved, the team has regressed, or the parts of the business has regressed. Let's look at, we might find that the team wants to learn something, fine. We might find that things are taking longer than we thought and we need to reduce the amount of work that we're going to do for the next iteration and so on. So that context assessment is a huge benefit to the planning for the next stage. It mirrors what actually happens in Scrum, because what Scrum teams do is they get their feedback and they start their sprint planning, and then the product owner or the scrum master says, oh, we've got to account for this, we've got to account for that. So this context assessment actually allows us to make sure that the team stays on the money for the for the next iteration, for the next 30 days. So we use this as a backbone. I think the enhancement workshop in the middle of the iteration really helped us, and we formalized that. We put it on the nearest working day to the 15th of the month. Our planning that we were doing initially was obviously the quarterly wave plan, and then we revised it on a monthly basis to get that. The solution goal, obviously the vision stayed much the same, but when we started to transform various parts of the organization, sponsorship changed their mind about which bits are next. So there was one particular project which came out of left field to us. It was an 18-month project and it was slipping badly, and there were huge consequences if that did slip or continue to slip, and we had to pick that project up as a matter of urgency and in order to pull it back on the path. So that changed our backlog and the detail of our plan and our increment roadmap, and it put a parallel path in it. And then obviously when we did the iteration review, we found that, you know, teams were struggling with some concepts. Teams were struggling with lack of tooling. We had a real problem with automated testing, in that some of the testing tools were on the red side of the firewall and we needed information on the green side, and that gave us huge problems. But that context assessment allowed us to adapt and so on. So any questions about that as a concept? Do you like it? What do you think? All quiet.
This is the interesting concept, John. This works for both the distributed agile also and in person, right? A coalition way of working.
Yes, you can do it for both the coalition and for the volunteers.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the other thing which I found is that actually software teams, although I designed it for business change teams, software teams can use it too. And of course it scales, because when you're doing, you can use exactly that model for scaling for bigger teams, should you want to. The planning and controlling side, whereas we did the plan, you know, I originally set out using a Scrum as my backbone, but I very quickly realized that we needed to use something Kanban like, in order to plan and control in this environment. And so in my book, what I've done is actually advocated a Kanban like approach, but you can't use work in progress limits in the same way as you do in Kanban, because simple fact is you don't know whether you're done or not, because of when you're changing people's culture, you know, things can go back. Thanks, Kieran. You like the bit about, I missed that piece when the chat disappeared. Let me click on the chat. Keeping an eye on the team, who needs to be in and out. Yeah, that was something which caught me by surprise. When we originally set out on this with the guiding coalition, we had a team of about 6 people, but we very quickly realized that two of those, or one of those in particular, was treating transformation as a side of desk activity, and we needed some single thread responsibilities. So so that was something we needed to add more people in, and adapting it all the time. Did it take long to get the necessary buy-in from the stakeholders of the business? Yeah, great question, Brian. The buy-in always takes time, right? And what you find is you end up with 3 different types of people, groups of people. There are those people that say, look, we want to do new ways of working and we want to do a transformation, and they go, yeah, well, let's go for it, let's try it. So they're what I call the early adopters. Then you get a group of people who sit on the fence and they go, oh, well, we're going to do Agile. Well, this is interesting, but does it really include me? Or I'm worried about this, or I'm worried about that. Then there's a third group, and those are the people that go, never. This will never work here. I don't want to be involved, and so on. Now, the advice I give you is that you need to work with well, obviously you facilitate those which were the early adopters, but you need to work and concentrate your transformation activities on the people that are sat on the fence. And those people sat on the fence are the ones that were going to soon become early adopters or adopters. Now, the people that were sat on the wrong side of the fence are very quickly going to say, either I'm going to get on the fence or I'm going to go, take a hike. And senior management in British Telecom were very forceful with the fact that this is the way we're going, guys. It's not an option. We need to do this for sound business reasons. And they gave us huge amounts of backing. They do regular town halls, and the town halls constantly mention two things. One is, what's the next stage of the transformation, and the other one was giving exemplar information about progress and how things were going and so on. So constantly feeding the machine for us. Quite often they said things which took us in, they said something which wasn't quite true, so it set us off in a different direction. They quite, didn't stay to the script, but that was fine. So, as long as they were taking us in roughly the right direction, we didn't object. Peter, on a more general note, what tips do you recommend for introducing Agile for a team organizational approach legacy, avoiding culture clashes? Right. Okay. So I think my mother used to say, you can't make an omelette without cracking a few eggs. Okay. So and there's a saying in Agile coaching circles that to run towards the fire, right? So you actually go for the issue, go for the problem area. So the general note to Peter is, I think the way to introduce Agile into an organization is to find an area in the business that is willing to try something and run something as an experiment. If you run it as an experiment and make sure that everybody realizes it's an experiment, it's not so threatening as if we're saying this is our major clash or a major change, right? Once you've got the evidence from the experiment, and you will get beneficial evidence because Agile is nearly always more effective, more efficient than more effective or more efficient than what you would expect with waterfall, then you can start to say, okay, if we got this result with that team, can we try another team, or can we expand it slightly? What typically happens, you do 2 or 3 teams, and then one senior manager says, this is going so well, let's do it all. And that always is a problem for you. So, yeah, it's, I would say start small, Peter, and do it gradually. Make sure your coaches understand Agile and don't necessarily try and cookie cut something from a book. Emmanuel, you've got your hand up.
Okay, thank you. Quite interesting topic. I wanted to ask you mentioned that you can start it as experimental and you communicate to the team that it's experimental. Doesn't it bring distorted results in the sense that once you say it's experimental, people will be like, oh, we are just, they don't put that full commitment compared to say, let's just start it as small. It's a genuine thing, but we are just starting with a small group who are kind of more committed to it. Then if it works, we transfer it to the bigger group than experimental.
It's great. It's great question and a great comment and an interesting observation. Has anybody, if you've come across something called the Hawthorne experiments, the Hawthorne experiments were around a group of electric winders, you know, where you wind onto a spindle to create an electric motor, in the 1930s or 20s, I think. And they were convinced, this is the age of scientific management, you know, plan and control, and they were convinced that they needed to find the optimum lighting for the winding shop. And they separated a group of ladies, they were largely ladies doing the winding, and they separated this group out and they treated them, and they increased the lighting and production went up. They decreased the lighting and production went up, and they got it to almost dark and still production was rising. And what the conclusion were of the behavioral scientists were, there was something which they call the Hawthorne Effect, which is because this team was treated separately and differently to everybody else, the team actually was motivated. And we find when we're doing these type of experiments, there is definitely a Hawthorne effect. The team think they're special. They think that people are looking at them for examples. And they typically find that they've got a lot more freedom than what they've got into the current ways of working and so on. And they're getting training, they're getting, you know, different tooling, all of this sort of stuff. And you do get this Hawthorne effect that people increase productivity because they're being studied. So there is that side to it. But I think on Peter's point about cultural clash, where you've got a strong culture, people are more likely to accept an experiment and giving the examples and so on. So and people are likely to change. So you know, I've really tried to show you what Agile Liner is all about. Obviously, we've got a book. That book is on LeanPub. If you want to see it, download it. If somebody wants any questions about it or any advice, I've just updated it with some of the latest stuff that I've been doing from the bank. I think it costs £10, so it's nothing, but it does give you a good idea of how to approach this. And basically what we're finding is that people are really liking it and giving me lots of very positive feedback. I've got it in use in a couple of teams in South Africa. And as I said to you, I was using it in BT, and I'm currently using it with the bank I'm working with. So that gives you an idea. So, oh, and also I did the Coach's Cookbook is the other book that I did. So thanks, Brian. Thanks for your questions as well. Thank you. So anyway, I really enjoyed the session with you guys. I'll hand back to Santosh.
Sure. Thanks a lot, John. It's a very interesting session. The team, thanks a lot for all your active participation and asking for the questions. So we are almost at the end of the session now. I'm sure you liked the session and got the implementable actions from this session, and that is the whole purpose of this session too. Just to remind you that you will get one PDU for attending this session, and the PDU claim code is on the screen. If you have registered with the PMI ID, then you will be allocated with the PDUs automatically. If you have not registered with the PMI ID, you can still claim the PDU using the claim code that is shown on the screen. Thanks a lot for participating, and you all have a nice evening. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.